Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Sped Talks with me, your host, Donna Steele. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on accommodations and modifications. What are they? What to expect? Once a student has been found eligible, these are key terms that you will hear often. So without further ado, let's delve into it. Okay, guys, so as I said before, we're going to be focusing on accommodations and modifications at school. All right, I want you to take a good look at this picture. I have two pictures side by side. And let's look at the first picture and kind of analyze the first picture. I have three students here. I'm going to refer to them as students. We have the tallest one standing on a crate who is able to see the field without much difficulty. The aim is they're trying to see the game that is being played on the field. I have a young lady here. She's on a crate, and as if you look closely, you can see that she's trying to tip, even though she's on a crate, to see the game. Then I have a third student here, one who is wheelchair bound, wanting to see the game, but isn't able to see the game, even though a crate was provided for him. Think about it. For him to go up on the crate in his wheelchair, that might be detrimental. So in this picture, we're seeing that they have equal access to the game. They have equal access to the game because they were all given a crate. Okay, now let's go to the second picture. The second picture, we see that the tallest student doesn't require a crate because he is able to see over the fence without any sort of help or support. The second image of the young lady, they gave her two crates because that would allow her to be able to see the game without any difficulty. Now, the wheelchair-bound student, in this picture, he was given a ramp where he would be safe and he would be able to see over the fence without any difficulty. Now, so one picture is showing you equal access. The other picture is really what it's showing you here is equity, that we're not all made the same. We come to this world with differences. And as such, we won't always be able to access what we're trying to access the same way. So with that, provisions need to be made, accommodations need to be made, support need to be given to facilitate that process of being able to access. I want you to think of this as we delve a little bit deeper into accommodation, because this second picture here is really what accommodation is about. All right. I always like to start with what the law tells us, because everything that we do will be surrounded by the law, meaning we would be compliant if we adhere to the laws, and everything else kind of goes from there. So the law tells us that, and this is the American law as it relates to students with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 required the participation of students with disabilities in standards-based instruction and assessment initiatives. Schools are therefore held responsible for the academic achievement of students. Accommodations are needed to facilitate student access to grade level instruction and state assessments, or in the case of Jamaica, national assessment. We don't have a law that governs what happens in Jamaica. However, we do use the requirements of the UN to govern how Jamaica operates as it relates to special education students, which is pretty much the same. The law also tells us that requirement with respect to regular education teacher is necessary. The regular education teacher, as a member of the individual education plan team, shall, to the extent appropriate, participate in the development of the IEP. So when we meet as a team, the general ed or the regular education teacher also has a role to play. And one of that role is very imperative as it relates to accommodations. And I'll just continue to read, including the determination of appropriate positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies, and the determination of supplementary aids, services, program modification, and support for school personnel consistent. So, in other words, the regular education teacher, where a student is found eligible for special education services, that regular education teacher has a part to play in providing the services that the team comes up with, that will be mandated as it relates to in that regular education space, that general education space. Accommodations versus modifications. Let's look at accommodations. Accommodations may change how, where, and when a student accesses information. It requires you to teach to the instructional level, content standard, or performance criteria. It provides two sets of curriculum, school and home. So when you look at the IEP, you have a section caption, accommodations. It talks about what primarily will happen at school. And parents a lot of time utilize some of that at home as well. Modification refer to the changes that the student is expected to learn and what rubric criteria will be used to evaluate performance. It provides alternative books at an easier reading level. That's an example of a modification. So it's a change in the expectation of the student, depending on the type of disability that the student has. Why provide accommodations? Because all students need support in their learning, whether you're gifted, whether you have a disability or otherwise. Not all students learn in the same manner. Many students need accommodations to be academically successful. For students with disabilities, accommodations are supports. Accommodations provide equal opportunity to obtain positive results and benefits. Accommodations to a standard test format accesses an individual's ability, not their disability. So you want to give them that opportunity to pretty much reach their full potential, to show you their best self by putting those necessary support in place. All right, types of accommodation. Types of accommodation falls under quantity, difficulty, alternate goals, or output. When we talk about quantity, we're talking adapting the number of items that the learner is expected to learn, number of activities student will complete prior to assessment for mastery. When we talk about difficulty, adapting the difficult skill level, simplify reading levels. Goals, we're talking about adapting the goals or expected outcomes. Output, we're talking about adapt how the student can respond to instruction. When to provide accommodations, this is important. When you're at school, if throughout the school day in all school environments, that is what the IEP says, so you have to do that. Addresses the supports needed to participate in regular routines, activities, as well as specific instructional areas. 6 categories of accommodation. So you have setting, where will you provide this accommodation? Scheduling, at what time? Teacher directions, and we'll go a little bit more in these areas. Student responses, what that looks like. Sensory, organization/study skills, personal care, equipment. All right, when we're talking about setting and scheduling, we're talking about work or take a test in a different setting. So you might, a student who might have problem with distraction, you might need to set a quiet area for that student. So it might not be in the regular setting. It might be in the library, for example. See a student where he or she learns best. So if you know a student has problem focusing or being attentive, you might put that student closer to the teacher. Use special lighting, acoustics, furniture, depending on the student. Change order of task. Again, the disability will determine which one of these you use. You might need a study carrel, a visual barrier for easily distracted. Extended time on assignments, and if you know a student has a hard time processing information, so extended time might work for that student. Administering tests at beneficial time to student over several days if you know that the student cannot process everything. So, in one day, it might be so burdensome for that student. So you might provide over multiple days, the student might be able to complete that assignment or that assessment. Warning before transition. So for students who have autism, sometimes you have to warn them before you transition so that their brain can process that, okay, we're about to do something different, and they don't become overwhelmed. You might do a visual schedule. These are just some of the accommodations that you can provide in that regard. Teacher directions. You might use simple, repetitive directions, question items presented orally. You might provide them with answer choices to read aloud, fewer items on a page, on-task reminders, short answer tests. It can vary. Again, the disability will dictate which of these, if any at all, you do use. Students' responses. This, again, student disability will dictate it. So does the student need an audio recorder for his or her responses? Do they need a spell checker? Do they need to use a calculator to do math? Use of notes on tests. Is it an open book test? It varies. And just accommodations can be based on sensory needs as well. For our students who struggle with autism, a lot of them require a sensory accommodation for them to function. And this may be a weighted vest, special seat, fidgets. They might need a fidget while they're in class paying attention to you, because that's the only way they might be able to pay attention. Frequent breaks, a sensory diet, organization/study skills. That is also another category that we can accommodate in. You might provide student with a visual schedule, extra set of books at home, note-taking assistance. You might accept a late assignment, depending, study guide, or graphic organizers. These are some other examples. And another category that we oftentimes, have to provide accommodation in is personal care/equipment. Some students might require adaptive furniture. They might require assistance with toileting, assistance with feeding, a changing table if they're not fully potty trained despite age, walker, consideration of food allergies. And the IEP these are things that would be in the IEP for teachers and related service providers, and anybody who works with the student would have knowledge of, and access would be provided. Support for national or state testing. In the case of Jamaica, this would be national testing. In the case of Jamaica, this might be state testing. Universal tools, supports available to all students. So the test, once the student has the IEP, the test would provide these different tools for the student. Decisions for necessary assessment accommodations are determined by the daily instructional accommodations. So in other words, everything that this child has access to daily instructional accommodations, the expectation would need to be the same for the state testing. Bear in mind though, not some assessments and some tests dictate that they don't offer certain accommodations. So wherever allowed, especially in a case where a student was probably in New York, moved to South Carolina, and their state testing guidelines are completely different. So decisions will have to be made for the necessary assessment accommodations. Each accommodation must reflect an instructional practice. So, for example, you're not just putting an accommodation, for example, Johnny will sit next to, for example, Johnny will be given preferential seating. That is an accommodation. What is the reasoning behind Johnny requiring preferential seating? What would be that? What would be the reason? An instructional practice that would go with that is that Johnny is not able to sit or pay attention unless he's close to the point of instruction or the teacher. So you have to make sure it's aligned. It's aligned. You're not just putting accommodation to put accommodations, for accommodation's sake. The same accommodations are performed during informal tests taken in class on a regular basis. So you have to be consistent. You can't do it, I'm giving it to you for this test, but the next test I'm not giving it to you, unless you're specific as to why. All right, this brings us to modification now. And when I looked at the definition earlier, we talked about modification being a change. So course subjects, we're going to look at course subjects and we're going to look at grade. When we talk about course subject, it could be alternative or a functional curriculum. So something that is different from the regular curriculum. So we talk about providing this kind of modification in course subject. Courses are subjects we're talking about using a completely different curriculum. So in this case, alternative or functional curriculum. Reduce number of standards to master. So while everybody else is tasked with doing the 100 standards that are on the third grade syllabus or the third grade curriculum, little Johnny is expected to do a reduced number of standards. So they might say, okay, Johnny, do 50, and that we will determine if you have mastered it based on that. Modified assignments and tests. Where instead of doing 5, you do 2 or 1. And again, your disability will determine if that's required. Grading, credit or no credit. So you're going to decide, do I give credit or no credit? Regular or modified assignments, regular/modified curriculum. In most cases, when you're modifying, you're not really giving regular assignments or regular curriculum. It's modified. You might get an alternate report because you have not done what the regular students have done. So when we look at fairness, because some people may say, but that is not fair. We're looking at the capacity of the student to produce what the regular education student is expected to produce. And if the student cannot, then it is indeed fair if we're saying do less amount than regular education student. But notwithstanding that, the report card would read that there was a modification. The report card would not say, Johnny got an A without reasoning. So when we look at it, we have to look at it that way. And that pretty much almost sums it up. Assignment, when we talk, it's the same thing. Assignment tests, I covered some of this. Reduce number of standards, increase assistance or support, different requirements for assignments, use of a calculator, participation only. You might be expecting the person to just participate rather than fully, engage. And you, based on the participation, the child or the individual in question may get a grade on effort, may get a grade on a specific standard as opposed to the whole thing. Grade on targeted skills that, you want to work on. The teacher might decide this may be a pass or fail assignment rather than just putting a numerical grade to it. Grade on content, not format. So you might grade the student on the content and not the format. So when we talk about modification, as the word suggests, we're thinking about a change, something that has been changed. Something that has been changed. So curriculum modification is not limited to instructional modification. I want to leave that there, or content modification, but it includes a continuum of a wide range of modified educational components. I know I went by pretty fast. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns as it relates to accommodations and modifications, please shoot me your emails, your comments in my DMs, whatever the case may be, and I'll be happy to assist. There you have it, another episode, the end of another episode. Today we looked at accommodations and modifications. I hope I explained them as expected or adequately. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. And for my general ed, my regular ed teachers, I know that this is something that some of you struggle with, especially when you have a student who has special needs within your homeroom and they're being mainstreamed. I know that this can be a task to ensure that you are following the IEP and you're being compliant and you're adhering to the laws that govern such a plan. But if you feel like you need support, help, have questions, opinions, perspectives that you probably need clarity on, feel free to reach out to me and I'll be glad to facilitate that process. Until next time, this is Donna Steele. Say thank you for watching and goodbye.